Hello people, how you doing? Welcome back to another reading. And I noticed Epic's in the chat already. How you doing, mate? It's a late one tonight. I got home from work and I had my dinner and I shut my eyes and I fell asleep for like 2 hours or so. So I woke up pretty, I wouldn't say refreshed, but definitely I could stay up a couple of hours, read a book, probably finish this. And the last couple of chapters were quite interesting, actually. Around Tower Creed and House Hill and Tara. They were quite interesting reads. Hope yous are good. Hope yous have had a good Monday to Friday. Thank God it's Friday. Got to say, it dragged. This week dragged in, I've got to say. Anyway, where were we? Nice to see you, Epic. As per usual. Right, well, we just done the Round Tower Creed. So if you're new here, guys, which Epic isn't, he's been here every session, but if you're new, this is called Irish Druids of Old Irish Religions by James Bonwick. It was a book published in 1894, so over 120 years ago, at least. And we are on the chapter Ossian, the Bard. And to be honest, guys, I've not heard too much about this character, so this is just as new to me as it is to you. Right. A wild storm of controversy once raged when Macpherson put forth a work purporting to be a collection of old Gaelic songs under the name of Poems of Ossian, who was the last of the Fenian chiefs, and who, as reported on his return to Ireland after enchantment, failed to yield his paganism to St. Patrick's appeals. While generally condemned as inventor of the lays, the charms of which enthralled even Byron and Goethe, he must surely have been a poet of great merit, if they were of his own composition. But if they were the remains of ancient traditions carried down by word of mouth, Macpherson might at least be credited with weaving them into a more or less connected narratives. There has been much debate as to the possibility of such rude people as in Erin and on the opposite shore of North Britain, having so retentive a memory, with the ability to transmit ideas at once beautiful and refined in language of imagination and taste. But as with Edda and the folklore of other semi-barbarous nations, facts prove the reality of extraordinary memory. It is not generally known that many Jews could repeat faithfully the whole of their sacred scriptures. The history of the poems is interesting. The Reverend John Home, the author of Douglas and the other publications, found a tutor with the transcripts taken down from old northern people, which were sent on to Professor Hugh Blair. Macpherson was requested to translate some of them, and these were published by Blair in 1760. Search was then made for familiar traditions by Macpherson himself, who found in Lord Bute a patron for the publishing of Fingal in 1762. Dr. Johnson, the hater of all that was Scotch, furiously attacked the book. In 1849, Dr. Lownrost published 22,793 verses rescued from memory. The 1862 edition of the Dean of Lismore's book gives, in the appendix, a long poem taken down from the mouth of an old woman as late as 1856. Sir Walter Scott collected many Scotch ballads in the same way. The story of Grain and Dermid has been long known in the cabins of Ireland. Fenian poems have been circulating for ages among the peasantry of Ireland and Scotland. In 1785, Ford Hill published an ancient Erse poem collected among the Scottish Highlands to illustrate Macpherson's Ossian. In Gillies' History of Greece, we are told that the scattered fragments of Greek history were preserved during the 13th centuries by oral tradition. Bards did the same service for Roman history till the 2nd century before Christ. The The Shungarade of the Kalmucks, the learned Heron, writes, "It is said to surpass the poems of Homer in length, as much as it stands beneath them in merit, and yet it exists only in the memory of a people which is not unacquainted with writing. But the songs of a nation are probably the last things which are committed to writing, for the very reason that they are remembered." Dr. Garnett, in his tour in Scotland, 1798, says, It seems to me wonderful that any person who has travelled in the Highlands should doubt the authenticity of the Celtic poetry which has been given to the English reader by Macpherson. He speaks of the MacNab being in possession of a manuscript containing several of the poems of Ossian and other Celtic bards in their native tongue, which were collected by one of his ancestors. At Mull, he continues, "Here are some persons who can repeat several of the Celtic poems of Ossian and other bards. The schoolmaster told me he could repeat a very long one on the death of Oscar, which was taught him by his grandfather. The Royal Irish Academy had, in 1787, a notice of ancient Gaelic poems respecting the race of the Fenians collected in the Highlands of Scotland in the year 1784 by the Reverend M. Young, D.D., Fellow of Trinity College, Dublin. Upon this, the Hibernian magazine for 1788 remarks, Dr. Young gives very copious extracts from Ossian with a literal or at least a close translation and proves decidedly that the poems of that bard are Irish, not Scotch compositions, and that Macpherson has egregiously mutilated, altered, added to, and detracted from them, according as it suited his hypothesis. He appears particularly to have suppressed every line of the author from which it might be deduced that they were of Irish origin. There seems ground from the latter statement. There was the prejudice in favour of the Scotch origin of the poems, although the narratives clearly deal more with Irish history and manners. Dalriada was, however, inclusive of southwest Scotland and northeast Ireland. Croker declares that many Irish odes are ascribed to Oisin. The Inverness Gaelic Society quotes G. J. Campbell. The spirits is felt to be ancient and Celtic. There can be no doubt regarding the existence of Ossianic poems and ballads for ages before Macpherson. Donald Ross, Inspector of Schools, wrote in 1877, "A careful analysis of the thought of the West Highland Tales by T. E. Campbell points to an antiquity beyond the introduction of Christianity into Scotland." The Reverend Dr. Waddell, in his Ossian and the Clyde, had no difficulty, in spite of some apparent geological changes, in identifying some of the localities mentioned in the poems. "In Ireland," says he, "the joint tombs of Lamderg, Ullen, and Gelcossa, with the adjoining tomb of Orla and Rhino, might be identified on the northern slope of the Carrickfergus ranges between the upper and lower Carnels, Ossian's Carmel, and Lake Morn. Yet," as he adds, "the topography of the Ossian was a mystery to Johnson, to Pinkerton, to Lang, and a wilderness of error to Macpherson himself." The Homeric dispute as to the authenticity is recalled by the Ossianic one. Thoreau thought Ossian of the same stamp with the Iliad itself. Homer appears to us in connection with blind reciters, as does Ossian. Okay, that's what kind of reminds me of this Ossian. It reminded me of something Greek, like the Iliad by Homer, the Ossian, kind of Ossianic. There's something Greek sounding about it. The subject of Homer had his exhaustive treatment under the genius and research of Gladstone. Yet not a few learned men detect a different author in the Odyssey to that of the Iliad. The two poems depict different conditions of civilization, the Iliad being the older, with different ideas as to the future life. If, then, there be such difficulty in deciding upon Homer, obscurity may be imagined in relation to Ossian. In both cases, probably, there was a need of a compiler of the scattered bardic lays, the Macpherson of the period. Dr. Shaw's Gaelic Dictionary asserts that Fionn is not known in the Highlands by the name of Fingal. He is universally supposed to be an Irishman. King James in 1613, in a speech, said, "The ancient kings of Scotland were descended from kings of Ireland. Of the several migrations northward from Ireland that led by Carberry Riada, King Cormac's relative founded the Riada of Argyll. The Irish certainly carried their own name of Scots into northern country. It may be said of Ossian, as Gerardet said of Homer, we know nothing of his birth, life, or death, but tradition calls him the son of Fionn, stolen by a magician, and ultimately becoming the chief bard of the Fianna or Fenians. When these people were crushed at the Battle of Gavra, he was spirited away by a fair lady and lived with her in a palace below the ocean for 150 years. Allowed to return to Erin, the story goes that he met with St. Patrick, to whom he related the events of the past, but refused to be a convert to the new faith. Another tale declares that, when staying with the saint, he objected to the larder. The Harp, a periodical of 1859, remarks that other bards got hold of the poems of Oisin or Ossian and linked them together by the addition of a supposititious dialogue between the old bard and the saint. The Harp fancies Ossian had met with some of the missionaries of the faith who preceded St. Patrick into Erin. Miss Brooke, a distinguished Irish authority, thinks some of the so-called Ossianic poems arose as late as the 8th, 9th and 10th centuries. Anyhow, those coming down to our day betray a remarkable heathenish character and preserve the manners and opinions of a semi-barbarous people who were endowed with strong imagination, high courage, childlike tenderness, and a gentle chivalry for women. Goethe makes Werther exclaim, Ossian has, in my heart, supplanted Homer. Windisch, no mean critic, has these observations. The Ossian epoch is later than that of Concobat and Cuchulainn, but yet precede the introduction of Christianity into Ireland. Skene, justly esteemed one of the first of Scottish historians, sees that Windisch regards the figures of Finn and Ossian as a property common to the Gaels of Scotland and Ireland. He thus expresses his own opinion. The Scotch legend attaches itself evidently to the Irish legend. The Irish legends and poetry have passed from Ireland to Scotland. He says elsewhere, the old blind poet Ossian is a poetic invention which has taken birth and which has found itself first created in Ireland. In the chapter on Irish superstitions, reference is made to some traditional ideas of the olden times. It is sufficient here to observe that, whatever the views which may be entertained as to the authenticity of Ossian, those poems do throw some light upon the religious belief of the ancient Irish race. Their tales accord with those of the semi-barbarous people, and need interpreting after a similar manner. The legendary heroes are not all flesh and blood. Interesting, guys. Interesting stuff. We'll have a wee look at StreamYard, see who's in. How you doing, Liam? Good to see you. Jed, why are you doing this live if you aren't interacting? Your narration style needs to work too. This is talking at the listener, not engaging like a good narrator. I'm just reading the book, mate. If you want to listen, that's up to you. If you don't want to listen, that's fine. Right, back to the book. In fact, what's Epic saying in the chat? 7:30. You. Narrators don't actually engage with the listener. If you watch any documentary and you hear the narrator, they're not actually addressing you personally, mate. Anyway, So many questions have been raised concerning the mysterious community called Chaldees, and such various opinions have been expressed concerning them, that one may excuse inquiring whether in their midst we can trace reminiscences of old Irish faiths. The notion has been long prevalent that the Chaldees were only Scotch, having nothing to do with Ireland, whereas they were originally from that country. Their most bitter enemy in early Christian days was the Venerable Bede, who denied their claims to orthodoxy. But since he was a Saxon and a priest under Roman rule, his charges have been slightly heeded. Their maintenance of an hereditary priesthood was not merely Jewish, as he supposed, but of Druidical sympathy. Professor Rees judicially remarks, Irish Druidism absorbed a certain amount of Christianity, and it would be a problem of considerable difficulty to fix on the period where it ceased to be Druidism, and from which onwards it could be said of Christianity in any restricted sense of that term. As both St. Patrick and St. Columba have been regarded by some modern writers as simply Chaldees, and not following orthodox views and methods, might not the many stories told of their conflicts with the Druids have been brought forth by ancient chroniclers in refutation of the slanders abroad concerning the heretical Druidical tendency? The same supposition may be equally directed against the early Welsh missionaries, though these were almost all from Ireland. Certainly, their assumed miraculous powers inclined to the old traditions of Druidical performances. They had, all of them, a control over the powers of nature and had even raised the dead. At least, their biographers claimed it for them. Dr. Carpenter speaks thus. The incidents in St. Columba's life have been originally recorded in the contemporary fasti of his religious foundation and transmitted in unbroken succession to Abbot Adonam, who first compiled a complete vita of his great predecessor, of which there exists a manuscript copy, whose authenticity there is no reason to doubt, which dates back to the early part of the 8th century, not much more than 100 years after St. Columba's death. Now, Adaman's Vita credits its subject with the possession of every kind of miraculous power. He cures hundreds of people afflicted with inveterate diseases, accorded safety to storm-tossed vessels, himself walked across the sea to his island home, drove demons out of milk pails, outwitted sorcerers, and gave supernatural powers to domestic implements. All this reminds one strongly of the powers attributed by the tradition to the Druids of the period, and points suspiciously to some outgrowth from Druidism in his case. Columba was an Irishman of Donegal, and died, as it is said, in 597. Adamnan declares that his staff, without which a Druid could not do but little, when once left behind at Iona, went of itself over the sea to its master in Ireland. He founded a monastery at Durma, King's County. At Iona, the ruins are those of the Cluniac monks. For, says Bowlby, not a trace can well remain of the primitive settlement of Columba, but Iona was certainly a Druidical college at first. Like the Druids before them, the Chaldees formed communities. Ritchie tells us, the church consisted of isolated monasteries which were practically independent of each other. The clergy exercised no judicial power over the laity. On the other hand, Wood Martin of Sligo supposes Christianity must have been first introduced into Ireland by missionaries of the Greek church. He notes the fact that bishops were to be found in almost every village. It is also pointed out that Columba never sought papal sanction for the conversion of the Picts. The Iona tonsure, like that of St. Patrick's time, was the shaving of all the hair in front of the line drawn over the top of the head from ear to ear. So this idea with the monk's head, how they've got this hair that comes round there. I think this was like a Latin monk, I think the Irish ones, they had hair coming over there from ear to ear. So they had like a strip of hair coming out. So they shaved they shaved the front and they shaved the back, and they left like a strip going over the top, from ear to ear. Let's see. Hair in front of a line drawn over the top of the head from ear to ear. So the Irish monks' hair came over there. They shaved the front and they shaved the back. So that's a wee bit different. Right. The Roman, as all know, was a circle at the top, and it appears to have first been adopted Iona early in the 8th century. The first, or crescent shape, was Druidical. So the first shape was Druidical. This hairline going over the top from ear to ear was Druidical. It was about that day also that the Roman way of keeping Easter succeeded the so-called Irish mode. At the Council of Whitby, Colman of Iona was outvoted, though protesting the antiquity of his own practice. McFirbis' manuscript speaks thus of the year 896. In the year of the men of Erin, consented to receive jurisdiction and one rule for Admanan, respecting the celebration of Easter on Sunday of the 14th of the moon of April, and the coronal tonsure of Peter was performed upon the clerics of Erin. So it was at the 14th of the moon of April. Again, it says the clergy of Erin held many synods, and they used to come to those synods with weapons, so that pitched battles used to be fought between them, and many used to be slain. After this authority, one needs not wonder at the assertion that Irish Druids formerly led contending parties. Iona had certainly a Druidical college till the community was expelled by Columba for his own community, and the Highlanders still recognise it as the Druids' Isle. An old statistical work says the Druids undoubtedly possessed Iona before the introduction of Christianity. It must be admitted that the Chaldees wore a white dress, as did the Druids, and they occupied places which had a Druidical reputation. They used the Asiatic cross, now called that of St. Andrews. Dr. J. Moore is pleased to say, the Chaldees seem to have adopted nearly all the pagan symbols of the neighbourhood. As to the origin of the word, Reeves might well remark in his notes in Columba's life, Chaldee is the most abused term in Scotic church history. As the Caelidee, the four masters mentions them in 806. Todd writes of them thus: the earliest Christian missionaries found the native religion extinct and themselves took the name of the Chaldees from the inhabiting the Druids' empty cells. Jameson styles the Chaldees or Chaldees or Chaldees, Caelidae. O'Brien has them as the Irish Caelidae, servant of God. Another calls them Clandia, children of God. Barber considers them Mithraists. Higgins in Celtic Druids will have Chaldees only changed Druids and regarded the Irish hereditary abbots of Iona, the Corbs or Cubs, as simply Corbanites, Corbantes, the Corribantes, Corribants, or Corribantes. Latin writer knew them as Collidae or God worshippers. Bishop Nicholson thought them cool dub from their black hoods. As C and G are commutable letters in Irish, we have Goyla De, servants of God. The word Chaldee was used by Boyce in 1526. Dr. Reeves in the Irish Academy calls the Servus Dei by the Celtic Caeli Dei and notes the name Caeli and Dei applied to the Sligo friars in the Four Masters, 1595. Monks were reputed Caeli Dei in the 13th century. Brockham's lexicon finds regulars and seculars called so in the 9th century. The Four Masters record that Maenach a Caeli Dei came across the sea westwards to establish laws in Ireland. In the poem of Moll Ruin, It is the rule of the Cayley and Day. The Cayley Day of Scotland, according to Dr. Reeves, had the same discipline as the Irish Colliday. One Collidaeus of Armagh Church died in 1574. One Cayley Day of Clonmacnoise, dying in 1059, left several sons who became abbots after him. The canons of York were Culdees in Aethelstan's time. Ceda, Wilfrid's predecessor, was a Culdee. They were also called from their mode of celebrating Easter. Quarta Mans, the last known in Scotland, were 1352. As Bede says, the Irish, being Culdees, would as soon communicate with pagans as with Saxons, the later following Latin or Romish Christianity. Ireland, as reported by Giraldus, had a chapel of the Colle Dei on an island of Tipperary, as he declared some were on the islands of Wales. They were in Armagh in 920. Usher, Archbishop of Armagh, asserts that the Northern Irish continued still their old tradition in spite of the declaration of Pope Honorius. In Tyrekin's Life of St. Patrick, Cayley Day came from Britain to Ireland in 919, but in 811 some were said to have miraculously conveyed across the sea. Bede, who opposed them, whether from Ireland or Scotland, was shocked at their holding his religion in no account at all, nor communicating with his faithful in any more than with the pagans. He banished those who came to his quarter. He found these Irish, Welsh, and Scotch Christians to have, in addition to many heresies, the Jewish and Druidical system of hereditary priesthood. Property of the church even descended from father to son, and says Dr. Reeves, was practically entailed to members of certain families. He adds that they were understood in the 12th century as a religious order of clerks who lived in societies under a superior within a common enclosure but in detached cells, associated in a sort of collegiate rather than a connubial brotherhood. Giraldus, as well as Bede, complained of the hereditary priesthood. The same principle prevailed in the Druidical region of Brittany and only yielded to the force of the Council of Tours in 1127. Although St. Columba had no exalted idea of the other sex, saying, "Where there is a cow, there will be a woman, and where there is a woman, there will be mischief." Yet his followers practiced marriage. But while, says Mylan, they, after the usage of the Eastern Church, had wives, they abstained from them when it came to their turn to minister. The women's island of Loch Lomond was one of the female sanctuaries on such an occasion. Their opposition to celibacy brought them much discredit with other priests. Archbishop Lafranc was shocked at their not praying to saints, not dedicating churches to the Virgin or saints, not using the Roman service, and because, wrote he, infants are baptized by immersion without the consecrated chrism. St. Bernard was distressed at what he heard of these Irish Culdees, who had no confession, never paid tithes, and lived like wild beasts, as he disdained marriage by the clergy. In his righteous anger, he stigmatized them as beasts, absolute barbarians, a stubborn, stiff-necked, and ungovernable generation, and abominable, Christian in name, but in reality, pagans. Sounds like my kind of people. This harsh language is not worse than that employed by the Pope when he entreated our Henry II to take over Ireland so as to bring the Irish into the Christian church, compel them to pay tithes, and so civilize them. One would fancy, with Algernon, Herbert, that the Culdees performed secret rites and indulged, like their Druidical fathers, in human sacrifice, from the legend of St. Oran being buried underneath the church erected by Columba to propitiate the powers and secure good fortune. In that case, however, St. Oran offered to be the victim so as to avert evil from bad spirits. If St. Patrick, St. Columba, and other Irish early Irish saints have been true monks, why did St. Bernard, in his Life of Malachy, Archbishop of Armagh, 1130, say that up to that time there was not a monk in Ireland? Columba certainly took Chaldeism to Scotland from Ireland. In the bog of Monenca are two islands. One was a monastery for men, their wives occupying the neighbouring Women's Isle. Giraldus Cambrensis, who wrote of the community of Monenca in the 12th century, called it the Church of the Old Religion and politely designated as demons all who belonged to that former church. The Abbey Church, the ruins of which still remain, and which was 38 feet by 18 feet in size, was erected after the time of Giraldus. Thus, R.F. Gould in his Freemasonry had some grounds for saying, the Druidism of our ancestors must have been powerfully influenced by the paganism of the empire at the period when Christianity dawned on Britain. He deemed it probable that the early clerics of Christianity, the cultures diorum, the worshippers of the gods, gradually merged into cultures dei, worshippers of the true God. So it might be that, as Higgins wrote, the Chaldees were the last remains of the Druids. And I always thought that when I looked at the sort of Chaldee and the Druids, and I always thought there was probably some kind of connection between the two. Right, have a wee look at chat, see how you're getting on. Hello, D. Hello, Shroomy. Good to see you, man. So, Liam North. Shroomy are talking away, which is good. And that's what the chat's really here for, Take. And I'm trying to read a book here, so I don't know if you want me to narrate. What more can I do than read a book? You want me to narrate something while I'm reading a book? Can you give me a break, mate? Anyway, let's see how many of the chapters are left. I think there's only a few now. Let's see. Look how many we've read. Right, there's only 3 left. 3 left. It's 1:05. We're doing all right here, people. I've still got my voice left. Right. That's good to see you, D. Hope you're good. And Shroomy is one of my oldest subs. Right, back to the book. So this is a future life or land of the West. And it's funny because this book was published in 1894. It could have been written earlier. It could have been written in 1890. But it was published in 1894. It's interesting to see if they've actually predicted anything that's happening like now, 130 years later. No more touching or inspiring belief was there among the ancient Irish than the hope of another life beyond the grave. Nature restored the dead forest of winter to the wealth of foliage in spring. Why should not the breathless form of man once find joy in life? But this happy thought with our islanders was associated with 2 things: the sea wave and the western sunset. The soul of the Maori, it was said, took its flight in the Regina, in the northernmost promontory of New Zealand, and from the branch of an overhanging tree, dropped into the ocean in search of its subaqueous home. The Irish, in like manner, knew that his next tenement would be beneath the flood. The dying Egyptian beheld the eye of faith, his spirit following the setting sun. The Irish looked forward to the west as a palace to which his ethereal nature would take its flight. The roar of the Atlantic was music to his ears, for it was but the echo of the voices of his forefathers and departed loved ones in the western land of the blessed. Pindar sang, where mortals easiest pass the careless hour, no lingering winter there, nor snow, nor shower, but ocean ever to refresh mankind, breathes the cool spirit of the western wind. Penelope's suitors, slain by her returning lord, were thus led by Mercury to the shades. So cowering fell the sable heaps of ghosts, and such a scream filled all the dismal coasts. And now they reached the earth's remotest ends, and now the gates where evening Sol descends. Kronos slept in his palace of glass in Ogygia, Isle of the West. The Hesperides and its apples lay in the happy west. The Teutons went to the glass Isle of the West, as did the Norsemen of the Celtiberians. Arthur was rowed to Avalon in the west. The sacred isles of the Hindus were to the west. Christian hymns still speak of crossing waters to heaven. How many of us have been delighted with Faber's beautiful hymn, The Land Across the Sea? The Gaulish Cockang, the Saxon Cockane, the Lusitanian Cockana or Happy Land were beyond the seashore. Professor Rafinesque might well say, it is strange but true that, throughout the earth, the place of departed souls, the land of spirits, was supposed to be in the west. To Rhadamanthes of the golden hair, beyond the wide world's end, never there. Come storm or snow, all grief is left behind, and men, immortal, in enchanted air, breathe the cool current of the western wind. And that's similar to the poem we just read before there. Procopius had a story of the West. Thither the souls are conveyed by ghostly fishermen to an island for rest, and the tales are told of ears detecting the calling of names as the boat touches the mystic strand, and wives and husbands being summoned to their arriving mates. Erebos was the gloom that fell after sunset. The word in Assyrian was from Erebu, to descend, as suns then dropped below. Odysseus turned to Erebos when offering his sacrifice to departed hero gods. Ghosts were there wont to assemble, and might be seen flitting to and fro in the uncertain light. The main entrance of Greek temples was in the east, so that the worshippers might face the happy west. Homer's reputed poems are unlike in their records of the dead. The Iliad knows no apotheosis. The Odyssey has it. Coleridge observes, in the Iliad, Castor and Pollux are mentioned in the ordinary language, denoting death and burial and no more. In the Odyssey, we have the account of the ultimate resuscitation, which finally became the popular fable. Alluding to the Homeric Hades and Erebos, W.E. Gladstone writes, a particular portion of the unseen world, apparently special in its character, is stated to be situate as far below the Hades as our earth is below heaven. It bears the name of Tartaros, and it appears to have been reserved for preter-human offenders. The condition of the departed generally was not very joyous. Gladstone shows this as follows. The Hellenic dead are wanderers in the shades, without fixed doom or occupation. Again, the Greek personages recently dead do not appear to have been either rewarded or punished, and Achilles bitterly complains of the sheer want of interest in this life. In Homer's Necromantia, we have the intercourse of Ulysses with the dead. He employs necromantic arts in his descent into Hades, which were strictly of Babylonian character, and the whole description reminds us of the fabled descent of the Assyrian goddess to the Sheol. The ghosts gather round Ulysses at the smell of the blood of his offerings, and, inspired thereby, expressed dark things to come. Tiresias then says, "Know to the spectres that the beverage taste, the scenes of life recur, and actions past. We are assured that when the hero sought to embrace a friend, thrice in my arms I strove her shade to bind, thrice through my arms she slipped like empty wind." Coleridge exclaims, "The whole of the Necromantia is remarkable for the dreary and even terrible revelations which it makes of the conditions of the future life. All is cold and dark, hunger and thirst and discontent prevail. The ghost of Achilles was made to say, 'Rather I choose laboriously to bear a weight of woes and breathe the vital air, a slave to some poor hind that toils for bread, than reign the sceptred monarch of the dead.'" So this future, the name of the chapter, so future life, the future life or land of the West, and I've obviously picked it up wrong. I'm thinking of a literal future, but future life in this is death, like life after death. So future life is like another term for life after death. And according to the Greeks, it wasn't a good place. You just wander around. There wasn't heaven or hell. You just kind of just stoked a bit, bored. Right. Ulysses, horrified at the sight of the underworld, exclaims, "No more my heart the dismal din sustains, and my cold blood hangs shivering in my veins." Horace writes more cheerfully of the locality, the land of plenty and peace. "No bear grins round the fold, no lambs he shakes, no field dwells there with poisonous snakes, no heat annoys the ruler of the gods, from plague secures these blessed abodes." Renouf, in his translation of the Book of the Dead, has his Egyptian prayer, "Let me have my heart, that it may rest within me. I shall feed on the food of Osiris. Hail to you, O ye lords of everlasting time and eternity. Let not my heart be torn from me. I shall not surrender to thee this heart of the living. Come forth to the bliss towards which we are bound." Professor Whitney thus speaks of the Hindu faith. "There is no attempt made in any Vedic hymn to assign employments to the departed in their changed state, nor, for the most part, to describe their condition, except in general terms as one of happiness." How far these old pagan views of the future life reached the shores of Erin may be seen in what follows in this chapter. A perusal of Ossianic songs, as elsewhere noted, will give the popular conception of the unseen world just before the reception of Christianity. The Purgatory of St. Patrick might be, also, consulted for information upon the same subject. As to what opinions were cherished on the reception of Christian truths, we may perhaps discover some in the writings of Eastern Fathers, upon the supposition of some the earliest teachers of Erin came from the Levantine regions, towards Israel. So, upon the supposition of some of the earliest teachers of Erin came from the Levantine regions. The following passages from the writing may exhibit some notions about the hereafter prevalent in the early Oriental Church. Gregory of Nyssa tells us, "After due curative treatment, and when the fire shall have destroyed all foreign matter, then the nature even of these shall improve." Dr. Gregory writes, "It is not just that they should perish eternally who are sustained by his breath and spirit. The fallen angel will begin to be that which he was created, and man, who had been expelled from paradise, will once be restored to the tilling of paradise." Saint Basil trusted that everything of wickedness in man shall cease. Gregory of Nazianzus Nazianzus, Gregory of Nazianzus, 370 AD, declares that all will be loosed who groan under Tartarine chains. Origen affirms God will be all, seeing evil nowhere exists. Seeing evil nowhere exists. Clement 190 AD hopefully says he, by the Father, will direct the salvation of all. Only Tertullian, from unfriendliness to the theatre, exults in seeing the tragedies more tuneful under their own sufferings. The story of the purgatory of St. Patrick declares another order of teaching, introduced later on in Erin, one more in consistency with the Babylonian doctrine of devils, and which still survives with its lurid light. A recognition of our fathers is more elevating, helpful, and comforting. The heathenish Irish did certainly dwell upon a land beyond. In Dr. Malden's Ossian and the Clyde, we read, when the warrior, who was also a hunter, reposed, his dog was laid beside him on the left, as if waiting his summons to attend his master on fields of air beyond the verge of earth, like Oscar's at Glenree and like Cthulin's by Lake Lego. And yet, in the songs of Selma, one mourns forth, no more shall he hear thy voice, no more awake at thy call. When shall it be morn in the grave bid the slumberer awake? In the chapter on superstitions are references to the ghost belief of other days. In the account of the land of youth given by the heathen Fenian Oisin to St. Patrick, when the hero was carried off from the field of battle by the golden-haired fairy Name, the region was divided into states under sovereigns, as in the land of the living. It lay beneath the waves in the west, in a lovely climate. How easy it was so blessed a place to lose ideas of time. When Oisin obtained leave from his beautiful captor to revisit Earth, he alluded to the rapidity of time-based past in this retreat by his 3 months' imprisonment. 3 months, replied the fair, 3 months alone. Know that 300 years have rolled away, since at my feet my lovely phoenix lay. In Dodsley's fairy collection, one King Porsuma was carried off by a zephyr, the princess taking him for a phoenix and conveying him, as in the case of Oisin, to Tierna na Og, the paradise of eternal youth. Oisin had a fanciful description of his happy home. You shall obtain the diadem of the king of the land of youth, which he never gave to any person beneath the sun. It shall shield you both by night and day, in battle, conflict, and hard struggle. You shall get 100 satin shirts, 100 cows, 100 calves, 100 sheep with fleeces of gold, and 100 precious stones not found in the world. You shall have 100 merry young maidens, bright and shining like the sun, who excel in shape, form, and features, and whose voices are sweeter than the melody of birds, etc. Then there was Flath Innis, the island of the good, which word is still the Irish for heaven. An old Gaelic poem had this description of it. The isle spread large before him, like a pleasing dream of the soul, where distant fades not on the sight, where nearness fatigues not the eye. It had its gently sloping hills of green, nor did they wholly want their clouds, but the clouds were bright and transparent, and each involved in its bosom the source of a stream, a beauteous stream, which wandering down the steep was like that faint notes of the half-touched harp to the distant ears. The valleys were open and free to the ocean, trees laden with leaves, which scarcely waved to the slight breeze, were scattered on the green declivities and rising ground. The rude winds walked not on the mountains. No storm took its course through the sky. All was calm and bright. The pure sun of autumn shone from his blue skies on the fields. He hastened not to the west for repose, nor was he seen to rise from the east. He sits in the middle height and looks obliquely on the noble isle, and each valley is its slow-moving stream. The pure waters swell over the banks, yet abstain from the fields. The showers disturb them not, nor are they lessened by the heats of the sun. On the rising hills are the halls of the departed, the high-roofed dwellings of the heroes of old. So it sounds like a paradise of green hills, clouds, with streams coming through the clouds into the. That sounds awesome. In the tale of the voyage of Condell, the hunchback, a wise woman sings thus to him, as translated from Irish by a French author. Tu improuves à cause de moi du plaisir sur les vagues ton chagrin serait oublié si sur la barque de verre nous avions. Si nous avions éteint la cite divine de Victorio. Many Celtic legends relate to a voyage in a glass ship. As Sophocles tells us, Orithyia was carried off by Boreas to the ancient garden of Apollo. A spirited translation of the Battle of Gabra by N. O'Kearney affords English readers another picture of the land of the blessed. Tiro Na in Og is the most beautiful country that can be found. The most productive now beneath the sun. The trees are bending under fruit and bloom, while foliage grows to the top of every bramble. Wine and honey is abundant in it, and everything that eye ever beheld. Consumption shall not waste your during life, neither shall you see death nor dissolution. The distinguished historian Lecky has this allusion to another ancient fancy, saying, among the many half-pagan legends that were connected with Ireland during the Middle Ages, one of the most beautiful is that of the islands of life and death. In a certain lake in Munster, it is said that there were two islands. Into the first, death could not enter, but age and sickness, and the weariness of life, and the paroxysms of fearful sufferings were all known there, and they did their work till the inhabitants, tired of their immortality, learned to look upon the opposite island as upon a haven of repose. They launched their barks upon their gloomy waters, they touched its shore, and they were at rest. In Joyce's translation of Connla of the Golden Hair, the hero is tempted by the fairy in these words: I have come from the land of the living, a land where there is neither death nor old age, nor any breach of law. The inhabitants of earth call us Aishi, for we have our dwellings within large, pleasant green hills. We pass our time very pleasantly in feasting and harmless amusements, never growing old. We have no quarrels or contentions. Beseeching Connla to go with her, his father, Con of the 100 Fights, called the Druid Coron to contend with her, and she was shouted off by him. But Connla leaped into her canoe and was lost. A land of youth, a land of rest, a land from sorrow free. It lies far off in the golden west, on the verge of the azure sea. A swift canoe of crystal bright, that never met mortal view. We shall reach the land ere fall of night, in that strong and swift canoe. We shall reach the strand of that sunny land, from druids and demons free, the land of rest in the golden west, on the verge of the azure sea. Tradition says that one Creed, the god of goldsmiths, had a magic palace beneath the western sea, where he was drowned while bringing gold to Ireland from Spain. Earl Desmond descended below Lough Gur, and has since been usually seen once in 7 years. he is ultimately to escape as Ossian did. The Grey Sheep's Cave near Kilkenny is the outlet. A piper, long confined there, has been heard to play on his pipes upon a May Day morning. Ireland was associated with the West by the Old Welsh, or as Professor Rees observed, with Wales. Taliesin, the great Welsh Druid, was stolen by an Irish pirate vessel of the period, but he escaped in a magic coracle before reaching Erin. The land beneath the sea was beyond the Cardigan Bay, the Anwen of the Old Sun, the Welsh Avalon, or Island of Apples, the everlasting source of the elixir of life, the home of Arthur and other mythological heroes, was in this Irish direction. As Mauryan writes, the district of Hades, beneath the earth and beyond the river, was the fairyland of our ancestors, the source of the passed principle of life. So with Ireland itself, it was a western Arran, more Isle of the Bay of Galway, from which the quick-sighted, upon a fine day, could discern High Braefielth, or the Enchanted Isle. Moore alludes to the tradition, and as echo far off throw the veil my sad horizon rolls, I think, O my love, 'tis thy voice from the kingdom of souls. The Spanish Bay of Souls lies west of Cape Finisterre. Augia was thought by Plutarch 5 days sail west of Brittia. The ancient Egyptian ritual spoke of the happy west. The home of the Calypso was in the west. Bailey, writing in Voltaire in 1778, said, the giant Gyges, 100-handed, inhabited the island of Atlantis, which is the same as Ogygia. The Bretons had their western Ifern, which was the Flathias, or Isle of Heroes, the Welsh Gwynedd. Vinlad, the Good, was westward, as were the Fortunate Isles. Spanish tales tell of 7 cities below the Western Ocean, where still dwell Christians who fled from the Moors, and some of whom returned after hundreds of years. America was probably visited by Eastern voyagers long before Columbus knew it. Lalla Rookh of Moore was similar references as, I know where the isles of perfumes are, many a fathom down in the sea, to the south of sun-bright Araby. Mythical allegory may give meaning to these stories. In the Transactions of the Ossian Society is the following sketch of the Land of Youth by Brian O'Looney. This Elysium is supposed to be divided into different states and provinces, each governed by its own king or ruler. It is all peace, tranquility, and happiness. The land of life is supposed to give perpetual life to the liberated spirits of the just. They are supposed to be located somewhere about the sun's setting point, and have means of approach, chiefly through the seas, lakes, and rivers of this world, and also through rafts, duns, and forts. The seas, lakes, and rivers act as a cooling atmosphere, while the rafts, duns, and forts serve as ingress and egress to and from them. Speaking then of the fabled city in Lascanor Bay, he adds, the white breaking waves are said to be caused by the shallowness of the water over this enchanted little city, which is believed to be seen once in 7 years, and of which it is observed that those who see it shall depart this world before the lapse of 7 years to come. But it is not supposed that these persons die, but change their abode and transmigrate from this world of toil into the Elysium of the just, where they shall at once become sportive, young, and happy, and continue so forever. It is also believed that those who see this enchanted spots are slightly endowed with the gift of prophecy. The life is not greatly different from that found here, since Oisin in his reported dialogue with the Irish saint, admitted, "I had, by golden-headed Niam, of children of surpassed beauty and bloom, of best form, shape, and countenance, 2 young sons and a gentle daughter." In the story of Cuchulain's adventures through this mysterious realm is a full detail of its palaces and landscapes. The hero went thither in a bronze boat, which awaited his return thence. They who were admitted to a brief visit to the upper regions of earth were duly admonished that if they once dismounted from their magic steeds, they would never again be able to return. Bov Derg went to visit the Dagda deity at the burg of Macan Og, where dwelt Angus Og, the god's son, and where Oscar and other Fenian heroes were entertained. Fiachna is recorded to have come to Connacht from the agreeable plain in order to obtain help in a contest with other deities. He disappeared in a lake, and 50 warriors dived in after him. War was, with the Irish, as with other people of German or Norse descent, a most pleasant way of beguiling time in the world beyond. Even Cuchulainn was introduced to undertake his perilous voyage, that he might gain a goddess for a wife by promising to help her family in a fight. There they heard noble and melodious music of their gods, travelled from realm to realm, drinking from crystal cups and entertaining themselves with their beloved. No wonder that a hero returned thence declared to an Irish sovereign that not for this kingdom would he relinquish a single night with the gods. In Irish so-called history, we read of the emigrations of Nemed, son of Agnomenon, from Mag Mór, the great plain, or Trag Mar, the great coast, or Mag Meld, agreeable plain. Nennius supposed this was Spain. It was, however, the country from which all came, and to which all death all must return. In the legend of the Tuan Mac Carroll, says M. Jubenville, Nemed's 4,030 men and 4,030 women voyaged from the Great Plain, and all died, i.e., went there again. The same French writer remarked how the relations which had existed here were continued there, even to the repayment of debts contracted on earth. The life of the dead, said he, in the mysterious region beyond the sea, is for each a second edition, so to speak, of the life led by the departed on this side of the ocean. O'Byrne Crow, treating of the Book of Leinster and other manuscripts, says, "The point of departure from this world, as well as the entrance to the next, whether for pain or bliss or business, was always in the west, and the route westwards. For the ancient Irish beliefs on this point we can appeal to the vision of Adamnan, which gives the angels of the west the guardianship of the entrance to the regions of punishment, as well as to the cave of Loch Derg, which is most decidedly a pagan relic. This cave of Loch Derg is situated in the west of Ireland, as the corresponding cave Avernus is situated in the west of Italy." Again he remarks, "Somewhere far away in the Western Ocean, there was supposed by the ancient Irish to be a spiritual country, called generally the lands of the living, and Traig Mar, Great Strand, and Teirngir, land of promise, of Christian origin, as in the Din Senkas, and Tirmar, great land, as in other legend. Further, the land of the living was the happy spirit's home of the Irish pagans until after the purification of all things by fire. Partholon was said in Irish legends to have come from Spain, not from that country of the dead. Tethra, conquered in the Battle of Mag Tured, became king of the dead beyond the ocean. Kronos also reigned over the departed. The plain where these infernal deities dwelt was the Irish Mag Ketne. As the son of Manannan Mac Lir returned to the earth again, so did the Ossianic Find Mac Cumhail, and Celt, evidencing the Celtic belief in the soul's immortality. According to some traditions, the better land of the Druids floated in Neem Hagas, as the Tremurti of the East were said to do in Akas or celestial ether. A bridge as fine as hair, like Mahometans believe to this day, connects this world with that beyond, which they truly styled the Greater Island. The inhabitants were robed in white at Murthem, the flowery plain, or Murtem. Sepulchral rites were as essential to the comfort of the Irish in their sheol as to the Greeks in theirs. As burial of the body was required in the latter case, so was the funeral song, feast, or cry over the corpse of the former, more or less performed to this hour by the Christian descendants. There would otherwise be dismal wanderings alone beside the Irish sticks, as with Homeric heroes. The ghosts are variously described. The oceanic ones appear indistinct and mystic in cloudland, floating with the wind. Such phantoms were of the worst sort, says O'Kearney, who adds, Irish pagans never dreamed of spirits after death having assumed any such forms, either in Tir na and Og, Flaith Innis, or any other happy abode of departed heroes. The spirits from Elysium always appear in the proper shape, and spoke and acted as if they were still in possession of mortal life. There are many elements regarding ideas of the dead which are common to both Greeks and Irish, though not direct borrowings. Entrances to the netherworld were recognised in portions of the East, and Joyce tells us, in my boyhood day, the peasantry believed that the great limestone cavern near Mitchelstown in the county Cork was one of the entrances to Tir no Nog. Dermat, in company with a wizard, or knight of the fountain, descended a well, and came into a country of delightful flowers and trees, palaces and castles. There, a lady fair cured Dermat of the wounds he had received in battle, besides entertaining him with music. In the Fate of the Children of Turum manuscript, we read of the island of Fincara, which was sunk beneath the waves by a druidic spell long ago. Then, one Brian, in quite modern times, provided with a magic water dress and a crystal helmet, saw most charming looking ladies. In the voyage of Maildun, also a privileged person was enabled to behold the Mog Mel, plains of pleasure, though these rather belong to fairydom. In Plato we have an account of banquets and hades. In Irish manuscripts are many references to the good things below. There was a lesser god, Miders, married to Etain, one of the goddesses. The lady, tired of her situation or company, came up and obtained Echiod Airem, king of Ireland, for a husband. Miders followed the faithless one, but she declined any further connection with the one who has no genealogy and whose ancestors are unknown. The Forsaken One engaged the king in a game of chess in which the loser was to grant the request of the winner. The king, losing, was requested to give up his wife. This he refused to do. The disconsolate one then returned to win over the goddess. He sang to her of the pleasant plain and invited her to return with him to a happier home than Ireland could give. He would give her there more tasteful pork, sweeter milk, and more intoxicating beer. There were rivers warm with hydromel and even wine. Youth never aged, and love was not forbidden. All this and more may be read in the Lethair na Hildre. It was to the mysterious realm of Tethra beyond the sea that the fabled Fomorian race of Irish retreated, when finally vanquished by the next comers. But the able editor of the Irish Battle of Gabra has the following story of the ancient emigrants or conquerors of Erin. The Firbolg and the Fomorian races, being more or less seafaring men, placed their Elysium far out in the sea and called it by various names, such as Island of the Living, Island of Bresal, Island of Life, etc. The Firbolgs are said to have lived under the waters of our lakes, the Tuatha Dananns being devoted to civil and literary pursuits, and the Druids, having held their seminaries in caves and other secluded subterranean abodes, fancied their Elysium placed under this earth, while the Milesians steered, as it were, a middle course between both, and made their Elysium in a sort of indescribable locality to which a subterranean passage led. This they called Tir na in Og, i.e., the country of the perpetual youth, and this they supposed the virtuous and brave to roam among fields covered with sweet flowers and groves laden with delicious fruits. Here some, as the taste inclined, promenaded in happy groups, some reclined in pleasant bowers, while others exercised themselves with hunting, wrestling, running races, martial feats, and other manly exercises. No person ever grew old in this happy abode, nor did the inhabitants feel tedious of enjoyment, or know how centuries passed away. The early Christian preachers tried hard to dispel these images of the heathen paradise, and that by details of a terrible hell, the Avernus of the pagan Orientals. When, however, St. Patrick told Oisin, as is recorded, that the hero Fingal was roasting in hell, the old Fenian cried out, "If the children of Morny and the many tribes of the clan Ovi were alive, we would force brave Fingal out of hell, or the habitation should be our own." In the early classical writings of Ireland, there is the same strange medley of old pagan superstitions and supposed scriptural ideas to be found in other lands of the period. But this is also mixed up with the Babylonian horrors that found their way into the Talmud, making the Jewish idea of the future so different from that of the prophets in the scripture. We have but to read of the so-called purgatory of St. Patrick for an apt illustration. The entrance to this purgatory was that known to the heathen Irish as leading to the netherworld, but the application came centuries after the usually recognised date of the saint, and was unknown to such writers as Nennius and Probus. Irish tradition preserves the notion of descent into the lower regions, as with Oisin and others. Ecclesiastics, in like manner, record visits to St. Patrick's purgatory, Lough Derg. Henry of Saltrey in the 12th century spoke of the saint hearing there he cries of those in purgatory. The knight Owen, in King Stephen's time, went down and saw the horrors. Some were fastened down by their hair to be bitten by fiery snakes. Others were in molten metal, rivers of pitch or lakes of cold. A wall of glass afforded sufferers a view of the joys of paradise. One monk, writing in the 13th century, affirms that any doubts as to purgatory would be at once dispelling by going to Lough Derg. Froissart knew one who had been there. William Staunton, 1409, saw horrible beasts, tormented men. Yet the Pope in 1497 ordered the caves to be closed up, upon the report of a Dutch monk that there was no truth in the stories circulated concerning the locality. Notwithstanding the papal authority, the superstition still exists, and vast numbers of pilgrims frequent the scenes of St. Patrick's purgatory. The descent into hell by Istar, Orpheus, Hercules, etc., yet lives in the stories of Irish vestants to the lower regions. In the ancient book of Lismore is the following narrative. Howbeit the devil there revealed the gates of hell to Brenaena, and Brenaena beheld that rough, hot prison, full of stench, full of flame, full of filth, full of the camps of the prisoners' demons, full of wailing and screaming and hurt and sad cries, and great lamentation, and moaning, and hand-smiting of the sinful folks, and a gloomy, sorrowful life in cores of pain, and prisons of fire, and streams or the rose of eternal fire, in the cup of eternal sorrow, and death without limit, without end. The Irish traveller beheld their demons torture men and women, monsters yellow, white, great-mouthed, lions fierce, greedy, dragons red, black, brown, demonic, a place wherein there are streams frozen, bitter, ever stinking, swift or full of fire, etc., etc. Altogether a disagreeable contrast to the happy land beyond of Irish pagans. They might have had no clearer vision than Homer's Greeks of the fate of the dead, though their lively fancy pictured a pleasant home. They had some glimmerings of light beyond the deepening shadows, while conceiving the ghosts of the departed as a conscious of the past, and not unmindful of beloved ones left behind. Some wild roamers of the rock-bound shores of Erin had a dim perception of a better land. The heart of the purer, the intelligence of the nobler, dreamed, however, faintly, of a realm of peace beyond, of a scene of tranquil beauty, of a restful time in the fabled isles of happy ones, where storms would be unknown, where never withering flowers would greet the grateful eye, and where the blessed west foretold repose. I prefer that version after death, to be honest with you. But it just shows you how the Christian authors and monks introduced, and it's almost through the Greeks, because these Greek philosophers had all these different ideas of life after death and all these different what happens when we die, and it's like then the Greeks started inventing these places you go and they're burning in, and all of a sudden burning in hell and all these weird places started being introduced into Christianity, and I think it was through Greek philosophy. Whilst the ancient pagan and the Irish, and they believed that when you died, you went to a place that was no suffering, there was no death, there was no coldness, there was just comfort and tranquility. So I think like these Latin Christians, this hell was a way to blackmail people, and giving the church money so they can be admonished and they can go to this other place called heaven. Right, we may fancy some white-haired sage of Erin, feeling the sands of life slowly but surely sinking, who would seat himself on the tempest-tossed cliffs beside the Atlantic, watching a sunset in those western waters where the gradually lessening glow foreshadowed his own departure. So it's like the sunset. You can imagine this druid. Was it a druid they were talking about? A white-haired sage. He's sitting on the cliffs looking west, watching the sun go down. And as the sun's flames extinguish, it's like his own life extinguishing. It's quite poetic, actually. There he might recall the friends of his youth, the deeds of his manhood, and the lessons of age. There, too, he might weep at the recollection of loved ones gone before, and yet smile at the prospect of reunion in the country of everlasting youth. Such a man, at such a time, may well have imagination quickened to a perception of the onwards and upwards in the inner life of pure humanity. Right, guys? That was a very long chapter. I think I only had 3 chapters, and now there's still 2 left. Right, guys, I'm going to end this one here. But it was interesting. It's definitely stuff I'm going to think about later on. The Mists of Avalon is a good book based on the Ether legends. The Arthur legends. How you doing, Mick? I'm going to have a quick coffee, and I might just start the last 2 chapters. I might just get this done tonight, guys. So I might just start these last 2 chapters after I make a coffee. So, thanks for joining me. It's been good, and I hope you've chilled out a wee bit now, Liam. Because to be honest with you, mate, like I do, like when I read these books and and it's like I put a lot into it, and it's hard enough as it is doing these things late at night without people on my case, kind of about certain things. Yeah, I'm my own worst critic, to be honest with you. Kind when I read bad, I know I'm reading bad, and sometimes I should engage more with the chat. I feel, and sometimes I should research more what I'm reading, like on the spot. But there's just certain nights, mate, where again, anyway. Have a good weekend, people. I'll see you in 10 minutes if I decide to finish this chapter. I'm going to have a look quickly over the last two chapters to see if I can do it in an hour or something. If I can do it in an hour, I'll probably start up again. Cheers, people.